Okay, here we go. Hey, Richard.
Hi,
So,
Michael.
hi. How are you doing? You're in New York, right?
I am, yeah, I am in the West Village downtown,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, named after Greenwich Village. So,
All right.
yeah.
Okay. And you're in your studio now. Is that your studio there?
This is what we call the blue room, even though it's yellow, because when I first moved in here, it was painted blue.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I would say it's my studio. This is a broken Epson printer
Oh no.
that is like needs to just get taken away by the people that deal with uh, electronic recycling. It's been
Yeah.
broken for like 2 years, and then yeah, this is my all my negatives,
Great.
um, uh, and there's a workstation here. And I got one of these, viewing print lights, the
Yeah.
soft view box.
Oh
So
nice.
it's also the spare bedroom if someone's stopping by and needs a place to crash. So
That's
it's a
cool.
futon in there.
That's nice. So nice to have a studio like that and yeah, keep everything there.
And it's attached to my house. I mean, it's just another room in my house.
Yeah, yeah.
I've always been very confused about the concept of like a work studio
Yeah.
because I've never had a separate one from like my house. And a lot of people like to have the separate space that they go to their studio. But
Yeah.
it always befuddled me because it seemed like extra rent when you could just like have it all in one place. And
I know, right? Yeah. Yeah, I've thought about it many times, like renting a place. I at the moment I'm working in where I sleep, and it's quite intense sometimes, like doing doing everything in one room, especially these days, you know. Yeah, but yeah, at some point, I would really love to have a space to work like that. So yeah, it's really cool. Yeah. Anyway, how are you doing? What have you been up to today?
um, I I'm a late sleeper because I'm a night owl.
Yeah, it's only
So
so I easily forget that it's only like midday there. So
yeah, I literally woke up at around 10:30
cool.
and read my phone, and then I went downstairs and made myself some eggs and wetted and tried to comb my hair and threw on this shirt, and here I am. That's been my day so far. My partner's gonna come in with some coffee because he's making coffee.
Oh, nice.
But
Yeah,
I'd love to be a more morning person, but I like the night too. So
yeah,
um, uh, yeah, it
yeah. That's
depends. So
cool.
when I travel, I get up earlier. It's, it's strange, but I mean,
Yeah,
I try to seize the day more.
you travel a lot normally. I mean, like,
Normally, yeah, I haven't been on a plane in a year.
yeah,
But normally I'm like almost move too much. Um,
yeah,
so in a weird way, COVID is it's been um, sort of surprisingly had the benefit of keeping me in one or two places for a much longer period of time, which has been I think good for me.
mm,
So
yeah. That's something I've noticed as well. Speaking to a lot of friends, you know, it stopped a lot of friends I know. Yeah, who like yourself move around a lot, and it's sort of given it's like a compulsory like breather in a way, like an enforced
exactly.
like stop and check in for a while. And yeah, so yeah, where to begin chatting about those things? So I mean, yeah, you're someone who I guess is known as a portrait photographer fundamentally, right? Whether or not you like, yeah, do you
Agree with
agree to
that.
that? Do you agree to
Yeah,
that? Do you just like photographer, or how do you prefer that?
I
Or
do. I see
yeah,
myself as I like to photograph everything. So
yeah, because you also shoot landscapes really strong and really,
Thank you.
really, well, I just see that, the photographs of people and the photographs of the landscape, for example, are, when I look at your work, I see them very much, yeah, I see them both super, super present in your, like, attention and passion, I guess, when I look through the
I mean,
pictures. Would you? Yeah.
I would say that I'm resistant to ever like I can say I do this well, right? Or I do that well, or I'm not very good at this, but I see no reason to define myself as I only do this.
Yeah.
Like I feel like you know, I mean, I'm not um uh I don't know. I just like to think that I can try anything, and if like I stumble on an idea or concept that might be suited in a different format or different style, that I could kind of like adapt or figure it out and
Mm.
use that as well in my, you know, uh,
Yeah.
my palette or my, you know, pull that out of my reservoir of ways to work.
Mm. Yeah. And have you been so over this last year, like, have you found that you're shooting around your home, or are you mainly staying, like, and you also make a lot of self portraits as well, so I guess that's something that, yeah, I guess you're doing that anyway, right?
Well, um, yeah, I mean, I definitely think that because of the pandemic, I have done less portraiture and portrait work in general.
Yeah.
Um, and it's been a little bit hard to navigate that because I have had some reluctance for my own safety. Um,
Mm.
and also,
Yeah, of course.
I don't know how other people are going to respond with that extra layer of vulnerability.
Mm.
So but I did find out pretty early on, like, um, I had been talking to the photo editor at the New Yorker for about a year and a half or 2 years now, and pitching a project to them. Or I went and showed them a lot of stuff, and Joanna Milter, the editor, she was really enthusiastic about this one project, portraits I've been doing of fast food restaurant workers
Mm.
across the United States. So I kept working on that, and then the pandemic hit, and we were literally about to go into contract. They were going to commission me to do more of my own project,
Yeah.
and the pandemic hit, and everything got thrown up in the air.
Yeah.
And she was like, there was initially everyone was so very, very highly freaked out and concerned, even if they were going to have a job in the next month. So
Yeah.
if you remember back to last March, it felt like apocalyptic. So, but I did have this new connection, and they were doing an issue of the magazine on the Apex in New York. So it was time to be on the day with the highest number of new cases and deaths,
Mm.
and or hospitalizations and deaths. And
Yeah.
um, so they sent out about a dozen or so photographers, and artists to make pictures on the apex of coronavirus. And then they did a special issue and an online thing. So that was like, a month or so into the pandemic. And I went out, me and my partner Seth helped me. He drove, and we went to 4 of the 5 boroughs in New York, and I made portraits on the street.
Mm.
Um, and I think about 75 or 80% of the people were wearing masks at the time. and it felt a little risky. It felt dangerous,
Mm-hmm.
but it also felt like important. It felt like I was doing something important at that time.
Mm.
And I was, um, and I shot digitally, which um, I don't, I haven't done a huge practice of assignment work of digital portraits. I usually, when I've been assigned, it's been with my view camera.
Yeah.
But it just seemed, because it was all in one day, that um, having a handheld camera would like give me a lot more, you know, I could be looser and quicker and be on the move. So, and I was fine with that, because I've been using my Sony A7R3. I've had that series for a while, and I love it. And I think I was pretty nimble with it and made some really good pictures.
Quick. Yeah.
So that got me, that greased the wheels, and then I started working on the fast food project again in in June and July, and I went on 3 new outings, but the cases had really dropped, and I felt comfortable enough. Like, most of the restaurants were closed, some were open, but I just went in with a mask, and I added to the project, and then like the fall just kind of got really stressful with the election, and
Yeah. It's also just been a super turbulent time in the US for you guys. Like, it's such a
yeah. It was very emotional, and I was like going some other stuff, and then I had surgery on my neck in October for a parathyroid that was not functioning properly. So I haven't done any portrait work since August, really. And the case, like the coronavirus, we had a second wave later in the summer, and then a really bad third wave, which we're just kind of coming out of now. So I'm ready to get back to it, and I see a light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccines. So and what happened is the New Yorker did end up printing a portfolio of the restaurant workers, and they came up with, I was like thinking of a dozen different titles for it, but they named it Billions Served, which I love, because it's like, the McDonald's, like, it says billions and billions served, and it's also like billions of dollars paid for these lobbyists to keep the minimum wage low. It just has this multiple meanings, and so I'm gonna continue doing that very soon. I hope to get out there and eventually make it into a book. But it came out in November in the issue, and I felt like that was also really important too, because as far as advocating for something, as far as an increase in the minimum wage, which has now become something that they're trying to work into the stimulus bill for the next pandemic coronavirus relief bill. That's 2 or 3 weeks away from being signed, and hopefully they'll increase the minimum wage, the federal increase, to $15 an hour. So that would be amazing. Then I could say I'm wholly responsible for
I hope so. I hope you're able to say that, Richard. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. But yeah. So that happened slowly, but it kept happening, and then I've been doing creatively self-portraits this year. I had been doing primarily my self-portrait work over the last 30 some years has been mostly just random, occasional self-portraits, and then the project I do with my partner Seth in hotel rooms that we've been doing for about 22 years, hotel room portraits. And of course, we just literally stayed in our first hotel room like 2 weeks ago in a year. So we went up to the Cape, and we spent one night in Rhode Island. And but I started a new self-portrait project called Emails to My Father, and basically that grew out of, I was supposed to go to, I'm talking a lot. I'm sorry. Do you want to ask me?
No.
Oh, okay.
Keep it coming, man. Yeah, it's good. It's good.
I was supposed to go to Oaxaca, Mexico, and teach a workshop with an organization called La Luz. And they, it's run by this woman that was an assistant to Mary Ellen Mark that used to do, Mary Ellen Mark did a workshop in Oaxaca every year. And this woman is Mexican, married to an American, lives in Minneapolis, but they were very close, and she knows all the people down there, and she started up basically her own workshop program about a year and a half ago. And I traveled to Oaxaca like 3 years ago, and I fell in love with it. And I stopped by actually the Manuel Alvarez Bravo Center in Oaxaca City. And there's a little statue there that is dedicated to Mary Ellen Mark. And I like totally was dreaming of like, oh, it would be so great to like, you know, like have the baton passed and do some of my own workshops down here, because teaching has become a bigger part of my practice. And then I was thinking about trying to do it myself, you know, and maybe hire like a friend who used to produce photo shoots and do it together. And it seemed a little complicated. And then all of a sudden I got um, an email from a former TA at the International Center of Photography, and she's like, "Hey, I know you had mentioned to me how much you love." This woman is also Mexican from Monterrey, and I told her, "Oh God, I'd love to teach in Oaxaca someday." And she happened to know Mary Ellen's former assistant, um, and she was apparently a fan of my work. So we met and talked, and she hired me to do a workshop last June in Oaxaca. And I was really looking forward to it. We filled it, and it was going to run, and then the pandemic hit.
That was also, yeah.
We had to cancel it. And they're called La Luz. And so they said, well,
I've heard of it as well, yeah.
What do you think about teaching over Zoom or online? And I was like, I was really wary about Zoom at the time because of privacy issues. And I was reading about all these people that were getting like Zoom bombed and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But so we tried a couple other platforms, but then Zoom worked out some of the privacy issues. We ran the workshop, and I decided I wanted to teach self-portraiture. And I wasn't, because teaching portraits right now during the pandemic seems challenging. And I've always and like, if you can photograph anyone in lockdown, you can photograph yourself. So it made a lot of sense, and I'd always wanted to teach it. And so that's what we did. We called it Self-Portraits from Isolation. And it ran from like mid-April to middle of June. And the issue was that I felt like an imposter because I never really did my own self-portrait project. So then, hold on one second. There's that coffee I was teaching.
Hey, nice.
So I did started shooting self-portraits last like spring, and they were kind of random. Some of them had to deal with nature and stuff like that, and being in lockdown, so, you know, isolation. But also, I was thinking more about my relationship to nature because I was outdoors a lot. I spent part of that time in Pennsylvania, and I was doing a lot of hiking. But then George Floyd got murdered, and the Black Lives Matter movement happened, and so I had like a big kind of a conflict with my father about it. He was very conservative, and he kind of gets his information from a very different source than I get mine, and he has a very kind of different worldview. And we another family member kind of provoked a conflict between us. And so it kind of like
just to add to the lockdown pressure and all of that.
Yeah. So this was in early June, and all of a sudden I realized that my self-portrait project had a purpose, which was that I felt that my father would have understood me better had we had a better relationship and he knew more of who I was, because he was not super involved in my upbringing, and we've never been super close. And so I decided to do a project. It kind of just it just evolved. Now it was very organic.
Yeah.
Like I didn't say I'm doing this project, but I'm going to start taking portraits of myself that describe who I am, you know, and write, attach those to emails and write to my father and engage with him about who I am. And so the writing is a big part of it, but I haven't shared the writing with anyone. I've shared some of the pictures, and I don't know when or if I would share the writing, but I feel like it's been very cathartic and therapeutic, and in some ways healing as well. And the pictures have been, it's been really fun making them. The writing is harder, it's more challenging for me, but I do feel like I've found a voice creatively, like that's somewhat humorous, that's somewhat really open and honest, and yeah, it sounds like my voice, my writing style. It's just like I need, it's like not as fun as photography. Like I like to make pictures. Like I feel like, oh, this will be fun even if it's challenging. But writing is like, this is just going to be challenging.
Yeah, writing is just challenging, isn't it? Writing's so hard.
It really is. But I mean, they're not super. They don't have to be super disciplined because they're also like stream of consciousness. So one thought or something in the picture leads to a story, and that leads to something else. And so I've been doing that, and I did it really rigorously up until about November. But then I had the surgery, and we had a house out in Pennsylvania that we sold, and we had to move, and so everything's kind of like, again, I've been a little distracted from creativity since basically the election.
Wow, that's an intense. That's an intense year. Yeah, I can completely, as everyone, has their memory of like when March came, and I remember last year, like when would that have been, like January last year, speaking to a friend of mine who was like, man, have you seen what's happening in China? Like this epidemic that's happening in China. And then slowly, like it kind of made its way, and then suddenly Italy was like completely saturated, and we were like, okay, buckle down, here it comes. And then mid-March it arrived here. And for me, I was at the time, I had just begun photographing a new stage of a project that was literally about crowds and social gatherings. and
Wow.
and it was about, yeah, it was a kind of, I was photographing, I was making portraits of people dancing in nightclubs mostly, and trying to find the moment when they were like completely lost in themselves. And the idea was what the crowd as a group situation does for someone as an individual, and the kind of the psychological state that can sort of make possible. So I was literally just taking my first baby steps in this new like stage of this project that's kind of longer term, and it was just starting to roll, and then it was just like knocked out, and then yeah, so I had to completely completely rethink like my, because at the moment I'm studying as well, you know, that's something that I was working on towards the masters that I'm studying here at the moment. So then, yeah, so then the year has been, ever since then, um yeah, looking into other projects and working on things that I've had sitting around, or lots of smaller projects that kind of been floating around. But and then now, literally just today, there's an announcement that kind of about the next month's coming, and whether and when the UK will open back up for things like nightclubs and churches. I also photograph a lot in churches and photograph people praying a lot. So yeah, so it's
Well,
been
I think
like,
that.
yeah, go on, sorry.
Oh, I just think that churches and nightclubs there's a nice sort of kinship in 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 their, they're so different. But I always used to call clubbing like, we were at church.
Yeah,
Like there was always this sort of spiritual Sunday morning component to it that uh,
yeah,
we weren't at church and we were all in the club, and
yeah,
there was sort of that both you can achieve a state of blissfulness and transformation and transfiguration.
all right,
That
that's
can happen in a nightclub when people are joyful and
totally, yeah, that's really, that's yeah, that's good to hear, because that's a lot of what my work is about. And you know, about, I would photograph people dancing in church. There are churches that are set up in like warehouses. Maybe I'll show you really quickly. Why don't I just show you a couple of pictures really fast? But where are we going? Over here. So these pictures are in the church, for example. You know, people praying and and kind of losing themselves in, and kind of dancing. But then the pictures I was making in the clubs, which are these ones, are kind of very similar. So it was very much about like flipping that parallel in a way. So yeah, anyway, but yeah, so we'll see when that will be possible again for us to go and transcend in nightclubs again.
have you
And
seen my Manhattan Sunday series?
I think I will have looked through. I looked through all of them. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So these are in a club.
In Yeah, in clubs,
Yeah,
plural, and then they're outside, and then they're like outside of nightclubs as people are
mm,
leaving in the morning.
yeah, yeah,
So that was really interesting to take the view camera into a club and
yeah. How
like
do you find work?
not being able to see what the hell I was doing.
Yeah.
and trying to make a picture in, dark flashing lights and with the dark cloth, and yeah, it was challenging, especially if I had maybe like decided to party before shooting,
Yeah.
which I learned was not a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you shoot with flash in there at all? Or is it just is it literally
I
just
I had a LED stick, like one of
yeah.
the wands, and that was the only light source I used, and I only
Yeah.
used those for the portraits. And then there's a lot of other ones that are just like blurry dance floor scenes, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I think it would be cool to go back. I just literally went to a bar on Saturday night. That now the bars and restaurants can be at 35%.
Oh, right. Okay. So things are opening up a little bit at the moment in the States then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's by state. So like apparently Florida's been completely open the whole time, but New York has been pretty strict. But I didn't. We were gonna. I've been spending most of my socializing outdoors, like under the tents and the heat lamps, which New York has done really well. But we were freezing cold. We were at one bar and we were outside, and it was like pretty close to freezing, and they didn't have the heat lamp, and we just had like those hand warmer things, and it was time to like try and warm up and go somewhere else. And so we went to this other bar that had just opened, and there were so many I just felt like there were too many people inside. I didn't take my mask off, and then they you have to have reservations now to go to a club. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have to put your name in, and so they can monitor and track everything. And they found a table for us in the basement, and we went down there, and like, this is not good. There's no airflow. There's like uh like maybe 7 or so tables. I mean, it was like, no, let's go outside. And so they had a tent available outside. So I'm not quite ready. I'm not ready.
Yeah.
I feel like I need the vaccine to get
Yeah.
into going into a club. So, but I
Yeah.
think that the slow, like the re-emerging process is visually interesting.
Yeah. It's
Like
yeah.
of seeing people socializing in these spaces
Yeah.
that were never used to socialize the way they're being used to socialize now, which is
Yeah.
like this. They had tables on the dance floor.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
these are this is like this weird hybrid phase that people are trying to stay afloat, and be creative and do what they can. And the restaurants are they're not gonna they're they'll try and do as much as they can get away with as far as public health, because their main interest is obviously
Yeah.
not to lose their business. So there's a strong tension there, I think, with bars and restaurants. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Something I've been thinking about a lot is that as things begin to open back up again, and into a time when possibly if we arrive at that time when everything is completely open again, and now at least for a long while there will be this like subtext or pretext to being in a crowd or being in a gathering like that in close quarters, that there will have been a time then when this was absolutely impossible, and that in fact it's very dangerous to be in that situation. Yet it's a situation that we need as people, as humans, to feel connected to each other. And I'm very curious and interested at this strange the junction between like the need for intimacy, but also the fear of the danger of that intimacy.
Yeah.
You know, like how is that going to feel once things do now begin to open? And I'm yeah, how to respond to that, you know. Will we be, I wonder if there's just going to be like we'll sort of like shuffle towards each other very slowly and then kind of totally be completely lost in kind of re-engaging in each other. But yeah, what do you think? I don't know. I've been thinking about it a lot.
I think it's a super unique place that no one alive today has ever been.
Right.
Like this physical and social distance from each other, and the set of circumstances that have kept people from interacting physically is now like in this, you know, it's been hard for a lot of people. It's been hard, especially for, I think, people that live alone and single people.
Yeah, super difficult.
And it's been hard for people that are not technology adaptive. I can't imagine. So, and now there's this like, I think everyone has a different set of responses to the threat. And I think there's a, like, it's not everyone that you think would be necessarily as fearful. Like, people aren't, not everyone has the same level of fear and anxiety. And I think that it's not only by age group, which corresponds to, you know, the fatality rates of people that are older.
Totally.
I mean, some young people have been very, very, very fearful and very like kept themselves in lockdown even when they didn't need to be. So it's, I think, triggered a whole other host of reactions. And I think other people have been just like, I don't care. I'm, you know, if I get it, I get it. And had a very much more cavalier attitude. And then, and then people responded to it also. You know, I know, I think Trump was embodied sort of this right wing sort of, not like, I don't need to care about anyone but myself, like that selfish reaction that like I'm the only person in the world, and that was embodied in the American president. But I think that there are people all over the world that have that same sense of selfishness. That they just live in a country with a leader that projected that too. So, like, you know, there's been, I think, anti-lockdown rallies in Britain and in Germany, and like, it's not only, I mean, Americans are particularly selfish, I think, but so it'll be interesting. I think that the U.S. is going to open up faster than some other countries, actually. I mean, I think that there's, like, I was just reading this article about all this pent up demand. And a lot of, you know, there's been a lot of people that suffered, but there's also been a lot of people that kept their jobs and haven't spent any money. So there's all this like savings and pent up energy. And so it's not just going to be an energy to, it's good, like physically embrace, it's going to be an energy to embrace the world again, to start traveling and to interacting. And so I think we're on the precipice. If, you know, we don't know the future, you know, one of these strains could morph into something even more deadly.
Totally.
Like praying not, but the vaccines seem to be, you know, pretty effective. So, you know, if we could at least look at, you know, what the track course we're on now, it seems like things are going to start really moving by the summer. And that will be that time we're talking about, like when, how do people reemerge and how do they go about with this distrust, but this desire, and that where distrust and desire meet, is
Yeah.
so interesting.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
I don't even think, who cares about photography? I mean, it'll be interesting how to document that, but just sociologically, that
Yeah.
space
Yeah.
is it's going to
It's
be
really
pretty unique.
mysterious space that
Yeah.
there's a real enigma in that for me. Just it's very
I
powerful.
mean, it's such a different space than the space I was in last March, where like I was like sometimes just whining and crying myself to sleep in bed because it seemed like everything was going like the world was ending. It seemed just terrifying,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and
Yeah.
so this has been quite a. I think for most human beings have gone through to one degree or another a bit of trauma.
And a process of like understanding how to. And I think that's the point of these conversations, really, is to sort of ask ourselves as photographers and people working in these conditions, but just as people, and the fundamental thing about this um, massive event is that it's totally global. Like you're feeling this in New York and I'm here in Bristol. And we're speaking to other photographers from from
Oh, age to
India,
the
and
continents, right?
like it's
Yeah, yeah,
all
that's
over
how
the
you feel
world.
the
So
same.
it's
Yeah, yeah.
like that is that is one incredible thing that adversity like that on a global level means, is that we can have conversations about these very, very simple, like basic things, or sort of
I want us to be. I want to be able to think like, oh, like we'll have learned something from this, and
yeah.
like there'll be some sort of like progress now towards
Mm,
consensus and agreement that we need to put more money into public health and developing vaccines and cooperation and all that. But I'm pretty
yeah.
I'm pretty cynical about that. But I do think that out of the collective trauma, something will rise. Um, and I think also if the pandemic is brought under control, that the it won't be obviously the the economies that um, start growing again. That won't probably be completely equal across the world, but I do expect maybe there to be kind of a boom, like a roaring 20s. Like if, like, because of that pent up energy,
Yeah.
the roaring 20s 100 years ago happened after the Spanish flu. And the
Exactly.
historians make a direct link between the globe coming out of that period. Um, I don't know how roaring the 20s were, though, in 1925 in Mumbai or in Tokyo, but I know from a Western perspective that Berlin and New York and Paris were like, there was this like totally epic parties spaces, and then people got carried away, and that will probably happen too, because as soon as
Yeah.
people start making money, they get greedy, and more money and causes people to behave in not very ethical and upstanding ways. So that might be predictive too. I don't know, but I'll take the parties for a few years for sure
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
before we crash again, crash and burn.
Please.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, even church I mean, there will be. Yeah, I mean, it's like the same thing. You're right. So interesting that we're photographing religious gatherings and nightclubs. It's yeah. I mean, I don't know if you know about like the American Baptist and Black churches and the musical traditions there, and
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
like really just like a beautiful sort of
So
uh,
powerful.
yeah, really like the ritual, you know, of getting
Yeah.
together and having music is it's it doesn't have to be associated with God, but it can be.
Yeah.
But which I like that it's something more, I think, primal in us to want to get together and dance and celebrate and commune. You know, I think commune is a good word.
Yeah. A space to commune
Yeah,
and
and we've had no space to do that. You know, like I mean, my partner just had a big birthday last weekend, and I was like, I'm not doing a Zoom birthday thing. You know, it's just not the right. It's not the same. I would have had a big party for him, but
yeah.
like these like I like teaching on Zoom, and I actually adapted really well. But I think for especially, I mean, there's some things I actually like more about teaching online um, than in person, especially because you can. I think what's going to happen with education is there's going to be hybrid models where now it'll
Yeah.
become a combination of in-person and online,
Yeah.
which I think will be fantastic.
Mm,
Actually, I think education might benefit. I mean, I
mm,
know it's really a hard time right now, especially if you're a kid and
mm.
to be yanked out of school. But perhaps over the long term, like I imagine doing a workshop where we meet in person and then have follow-ups, you
Yeah.
know, where we could get people started on making a body work, and then they come from all over the world, and then you can follow up with them,
Yeah.
you know, like like several weeks apart, like 4 or 5 times a year or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you teach through a university, or do you just do like workshops mainly,
I
right? Or it's
mainly workshops, and then I teach with a school continuing education at International Center of Photography.
cool. Okay. Oh, that's great.
And ICP they do have an MFA program with Bard College, and they have also I think a 2-year degree program. But I am not an MFA. I don't have an MFA, and so I've done a couple. I've taught a semester as a visiting artist at a couple universities. I taught at Harvard in 2018, and I taught at Cooper Union here in New York in 2019.
Okay. Yeah.
And I really enjoyed those experiences, and it was different to work with over the course of the semester rather than like a 2 weekend workshop. I really liked that sort of
Yeah.
progression
Yeah.
over time.
You work with
Um,
them slowly, you know, and yeah, you see the work of each
but
student kind of blossom slowly, I guess. Yeah.
not exclusively by any stretch. But I do find I prefer working with graduate students or continuing education students um, because I think some of the undergrads are not really sure why they're there. You know, they're not as focused on. They're there because it's for some of them. They're there because they're supposed to go to school, and some of them choose art because it seemed like a, you know, I don't know, but I think that I like the continuing education because people are at a level of maturity where they're kind of open and they know themselves more, and so I think that adds to the experience of like. I mean, I like working with young people too because they're trying to figure out who they are, they're trying to understand themselves. But there's something I think to be said about working with people that have had a life. You know, you can have also had a life and be very young, but um, I think, you know, honestly, it sounds cliche, but like hardship and pain and breakups and just living life is, I think,
Yeah.
makes for more. Makes.
Experience.
I
Yeah. It
mean,
comes to the work, doesn't it?
it does. And that's not to say though that like someone that's had a really good parenting and done really like can't make great work or have really inspiring thoughts, but to share with the world. But I do think that our stories are informed kind of, you know, like
by experience.
Yeah, I think it's important.
Yeah.
And education is one thing that's great, but I can understand needing to not be in that world to also make art, like that you need to live life too, you know, like, and at least if you're considering graduate school, maybe there should be, you know, some years there between finishing the first degree.
Yeah.
I don't know. Or slower or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I think those things are really important. I had a few years in between my undergrad and what I'm doing now, my postgraduate, and I definitely felt like I really needed that. Otherwise you just have like a whole life of being in school and without any break, you know. You don't stand on your own feet really until you get out of school, you know. And so it's important.
I have some friends that have been in academia their whole lives.
Yeah.
And they are amazing because they know so much, but they know like this narrow band, and it's like, wait, what's that? And oh, I don't know about that over there, but they know everything in that band.
It's this super intense beam of like intellect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's this like, then yeah.
I mean, thank goodness. I appreciate that though. I think it's you know, I think we need that, you know, as far as, and we need to foster and appreciate like people that go into these narrow bands, because without like the arts or humanities or, you know, everything now is, so many school programs are gearing their students towards computer science or business, and it's just sad to not promote, you know, culture and other things that are outside of ways to make money. But at the same, I mean, it's probably less of a problem in the UK, but because the university is so expensive in the United States, people are making choices that are based solely on, you know, well, is this going to get me a job, and what is this for my future, and do I want to take on $50,000 or $100,000 a day? Those are real important questions, and Anyway, back to the pandemic.
Well, yeah. I mean, how long have we been chatting now? I think we should probably wrap it up soon. I mean, you've got your coffee to drink, and I guess it's still going anyway. Yeah.
Any last final questions or thoughts? Or
well, I guess the one last piece of work of yours that I wanted to talk about is touching strangers, and that's something that it's had quite a broad scope, right? As in like in terms of the amount of time that you've been working on that work, or you were photographing that work, because it was quite a few years. Am I right?
7.
Yeah. And is that a project that you've totally finished now? Do you feel like, or is it something that you continue as you know, because you do you find that you make portraits for a specific project, or do you like shoot portraits and then you see, wait, now there's a theme here. This one is all of strangers and they're touching. Then you go forwards and you seek those situations then. This question's turned into lots of different questions, but
you're asking about process too.
I guess.
Well, I like to work on multiple things at once. I like to photograph, so I do have just single untethered portraits and work that does not um, fall under sort of a project. But I love working in projects too. I like to think of ideas and or organically come, like, things grow out of something else. Um, so like progression of like this led to this, and for me, I think that it's really valuable and important to have some ideas behind what you're doing. I just saw this show at ICP uh, that's curated by Paul Graham, and it's like the theme is post-documentary, and it's basically the curatorial statement basically has an argument for these images. We had no intent behind them, and they're just brought together. And there's they use the word freedom, and I'm like, it sounds to me a little bit like, okay, well, we'll just grab from here and here and just throw it up there, and this is what it means. But like, I I feel like that feels a little lazy. Like, think of an idea and like think like, I mean, I'm not saying I don't I liked a lot of the work I saw on that show. But curators have to write something, and I feel like if someone thinks of a good concept and they work really hard on it, then let's celebrate and recognize that, and stop labeling things post-documentary or after this, or like just like it's just a bunch of mumbo jumbo in my opinion. And what I feel like is Touching Strangers, like that was something I worked on for 7 years, and I was done. I said what I had to say, and I felt ready to move on. I felt like I explored this question of how people would interact, and I learned how to be a director and I learned to make people, that I could make people do things just by suggesting it, and that I could create these like borderline faux / real moments of intimacy between strangers, by creating trust with them, and people would give themselves over to my direction, and that was great. And I learned a lot from it. It was so people like really received it, like especially women. Like I just looked at my thing on Instagram, and 60% of my audience is women, which is so weird because I'm like a gay man, and I like I would like more gay men to follow.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But people like connected to an emotional space that I think that work functioned in, and I get that, but I also didn't feel like that was the only thing I had to say for the rest of my life. And the world really likes to pigeonhole you into something or another. And I think in some ways that work, people read it wrong. It was misread. I mean, like I think a lot of people projected hopefulness onto that, and I was approaching it more as a question mark rather than some something
statement necessarily, or like
it wasn't really a statement. Like
it's like a process.
There was a cataloging, which is something that runs throughout all my work, like all different types of people. Being a portrait photographer, I'm interested in cataloging of human beings, just in the same way that Sandra did his people of the 20th century. And
I was just thinking about Sandra then. Yeah.
But But yeah, so touching strangers, it does speak to the time we're in now because of like this limitations on touch. Um, and I think historically, if people go back and look at that work, I mean, that work was made like, you know, just in the few years preceding the pandemic, and preceding the rise of nationalism around the world. And so hopefully, you know, that work will have imbue itself with new and different meanings
Yeah,
as it
as the
ages.
context changes as well, and like, yeah, yeah, will take on, yeah, new and different readings. I think that's also maybe one of the great, I suppose, the privileges of being a photographer, or one of the great things about being a photographer in general, is that I mean, I haven't been doing it for very long, but I can see how that after some time, the pictures you made 10, 20, 30, 40 years, the context is totally different. And it's like the pictures are reborn every day almost
Yeah.
into the mind of each person looking at them. And now thinking about this brings us back to that other part of our conversation, just about this era of COVID and then the post-COVID era, regardless of whatever you want to call that, or pigeonhole it or whatever, regardless of whatever you want to call it, yeah, there's a whole, each period is a new goggles to look at work through. And that's, yeah, that's very interesting. I was just thinking a lot about touch when I was looking, I mean, the title, Touching Strangers, and how in this time our hands, which are things that like serve us and can caress people, other people that we want to be intimate with, or even if they're a stranger, are able to create a deep sense of intimacy with in their hands. Like I look at a lot in your photographs at people's hands.
Yeah.
And what I was thinking a lot about through this time, or particularly when it first, like in March, I was thinking about the hands a lot, because these things that are our greatest tools and things that we trust to do what we want them to do are also like became like these things of possible potential danger, like what could be on your hands. And then the fact that that constantly wash your hands, like be clinical with your hands and all of these things. And so I wonder if, yeah, again, going forwards, that's another experience to sort of look at those pictures through. And uh, I guess I'm interested in how, I don't know, how that might affect how you might photograph, perhaps, or in going forwards, or how, yeah, about whether that's something that you've thought about, not specifically hands, but just touch and intimacy. And I mean, yeah.
I mean, part of me is compelled to make a touching strangers in this space right now.
Yeah.
Like where we know that like actually we're not transmitting the virus very much at all through our hands. And we
Right.
know it's coming from our breath.
Yeah.
So what would happen if I asked two people that are masked on the street that were strangers to touch each other?
Yeah.
What, like,
That's such a fascinating project, And
yeah.
there's, yeah.
I may do that, but I'm not really interested in reopening it. But
It's a
it
different
does
thing,
it.
right? It would be a
Yeah,
different
yeah,
project. Yeah.
yeah. And again, the idea is out there in the world, and it's I think time will just let it do its work, and hopefully out of the pandemic too, we'll start to see some shifts in culture and style and fashion, because like if you look at every decade, people look different from the 50s to the 60s to the 70s and the 80s. And then you get to the 1990s, and people haven't really changed the way they look in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
And I think that that's because there's no longer, like, I think it has something to do with capitalism, and the lack of actual like people rebelling against something. You know, they're not rebelling against something, and maybe in this post-COVID world, people begin to rebel again against systems or whatever. But you know, you could go back to my early Touching Strangers or pictures from my archive from the year 2000, and we don't look that much different today.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the jeans were baggy for a while or whatever, but like in general, you could probably not identify. Whereas before, like, people looked like you see a picture of someone from the 80s and they have such an 80s look.
Yeah, so 80s. Yeah.
But you see a picture from 1997.
Yeah, it's
maybe
not
you see the same exact time.
Yeah.
It's not that different.
Yeah. That's so interesting, that this idea that sort of, if I think about at least this country, it seems like since as you say, the 1990s began, which is like through the 80s, for example, the intense political conviction of people generally were, you know, marching, like intense political conviction, protest was very, very strong through the 80s. Then Thatcher really changed a lot in this country, Margaret Thatcher, and then
deregulated.
Exactly.
Same with Reagan.
Totally.
That's when really economic policies of the right really took over.
Yeah.
And it sort of like everyone got uncomfortable enough to own a TV and like just veg out and not participate anymore. I don't know what happened, but
yeah. That's very interesting correlation that you make there, like between simple thing like clothing and political conviction of a whole era, because it's I can completely see that correlation. Yeah.
That's why you look at like Stephen Shore's pictures from the 70s and they're just so like, you know,
so 70s, like, no, just
they exactly they take on the pistache of history. You know, like there's something happening when you see those pictures that is really about like time, a time that no longer exists, and like they feel historic, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas pictures from like 98, they haven't done that yet.
No, yeah. Despite like technology advancing hugely, like all of those things, like that's all advanced massively since that time. But why not the way we represent ourselves and the way that we dress? That's another very enigmatic question.
It's also tied into nostalgia too. So, and that's where I think, interestingly, the pandemic, we have nostalgia for the way things were 2.5 years ago. So that's going to be like, again, like what does that mean? Like we're nostalgic about 2019.
Yeah, you're right. Heaven forbid.
Maybe that's a good place to leave it.
Yeah, that's a really good place to let's stop there. Okay. Cool. Richard, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Really good
definitely.
To meet you.
So is this going to be posted up online?